Have you ever wondered what life was like for a slave in ancient Rome? Beyond the Colosseum and gladiators, Rome's sprawling empire relied on millions of enslaved people, each with their own grueling routines. Today, we'll step into the shoes of one of the most common figures in ancient Roman society, the household slave. From the crack of dawn to the dead of night, their lives were far from their own, dictated by the needs and whims of their masters. Let's explore a day in the life of a Roman household slave. The day began long before the sun rose. Most household slaves in Rome were up by 4 or 5 a.m. the moment the house stirred. Their masters may still have been asleep, but that didn't mean there wasn't work to be done. For some, the first task was lighting the hypocaust, the underground heating system that warmed the home. Others cleaned the master's chambers or started preparations for breakfast. If the master had children, one of the household slaves would take on the role of caregiver. This meant feeding the children, getting them dressed, and making sure they were prepared for any lessons. Household slaves had to be meticulous. Any mistake could result in punishment, whether that was a simple rebuke or something far worse. For many, their breakfast was nothing more than a simple bite of bread or porridge, if they were lucky. Food was often leftovers from the day before, and the amount varied based on their master's generosity. By mid-morning, the household would be bustling. While the family enjoyed a more substantial meal, the slaves were busy cooking, cleaning, and making sure everything was in perfect order. Tasks varied widely, depending on the size of the house. Some slaves worked directly in the kitchen, while others cleaned the grand rooms or worked in the garden. If the family had guests coming later, slaves were responsible for setting up the entertainment, organizing the dining area, and ensuring every detail was just right. This was no small task, and for many slaves, perfection was expected. Some would run errands to fetch fresh ingredients or supplies from local markets, and all the while, they were constantly supervised, often by other slaves who had risen to the rank of overseer. Around midday, slaves would get a brief reprieve for lunch. But don't imagine a leisurely break. Slaves often had very little time to eat, a quick meal of bread, vegetables, or whatever scraps were available. If the household was particularly busy or preparing for a large event, slaves might not get a break at all. Their work was relentless, and the concept of time off didn't exist. Despite the hard labor, there was a small sense of camaraderie among the slaves. This brief break was one of the few moments in their day where they could talk, share their frustrations, or lend support to one another. As the day wore on, the responsibilities of household slaves continued. In the afternoon, their tasks shifted depending on the needs of the master. Some might be tending to the garden, ensuring the family's supply of vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Others might be preparing elaborate evening meals or tending to the livestock. For some slaves, afternoons were dedicated to more specialized roles. If they were skilled in weaving, carpentry, or even tutoring, they would spend this time plying their trade. While most slaves were kept illiterate and uneducated, certain trusted slaves, particularly those in wealthy households, could be responsible for teaching children. These slaves often had higher status, but remained under constant watch. In Rome, slaves were often considered part of the household, but make no mistake, they were not seen as people, but property. Masters could be brutal, punishing even minor mistakes with beatings or worse. Fear of punishment hung over every task, making even the simplest chore one filled with anxiety. As evening approached, the slaves' day was far from over. In fact, some of the most demanding tasks lay ahead. If the master was hosting a dinner or party, slaves were expected to serve the guests, clean up afterwards, and ensure everything ran smoothly. A Roman dinner, or cena, could last hours, and during this time, slaves worked in the background, offering food, drinks, and sometimes even entertainment. For those not directly involved in serving, there was still work to be done. Cleaning, laundering, and tending to any evening requests from their masters filled these hours. It wasn't until late in the night, sometimes well past midnight, that the slaves could finally rest. After the house had finally settled, the slaves would retreat to their cramped quarters. They didn't have the luxury of privacy. Most slaves slept in small shared rooms with little more than straw bedding. Exhausted, they'd collapse, knowing that in just a few hours, the cycle would begin again. But life wasn't entirely without hope. Some slaves could earn enough favor to eventually buy their freedom or be manumitted by their masters. While rare, these opportunities provided a glimmer of hope for a future beyond slavery. Some slaves, particularly those with specialized skills, manage to save money, or be freed after years of loyal service. The life of a household slave in ancient Rome was harsh, filled with long hours, minimal food, and the constant threat of punishment. They worked tirelessly to keep their masters comfortable, living as property rather than people. Yet, despite these harsh conditions, household slaves played a vital role in Roman society, ensuring that the luxurious lives of the wealthy ran smoothly behind the scenes. Thanks for watching. If you found this look into Roman slavery insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what other aspects of ancient life you'd like us to explore.